Hello everyone, Richard here, and welcome to episode 5 in my Killing Floor 2 perk guide. Today we're going to be taking a look at probably the weakest perk in-game and do our best to give it a fighting chance, and that is none other than the Firebug. Firebugs are in principle both trash cleaners and crowd controllers, capable of keeping large groups of weaker Zeds at bay with minimal regard to accuracy. They utilize flame-based weapons such as flamethrowers, fireball launchers, and weapons loaded with incendiary ammo. Before we look at how to use the Firebug, let's dive into what it brings to the table. Its passive skills include plus 0.8% perk weapon damage per level, plus 1% perk weapon reload speed per level, 30% Zed fire resistance increasing by 2% per level, 25% immunity to your own fire damage increasing by 3% per level, and plus 10% starting ammo per 5 levels. Some of the bonuses are relatively straightforward, but the Zed fire resistance will be the most useful on Suicidal and above when Husks can use their Flamethrower attack. Also, the additional starting ammo makes selling and rebuying the Cock and Burn more efficient, especially if done at or close to zero ammo. The Firebug also uses Molotov cocktails, which will not only burst open and ignite any Zeds within a half-meter radius, but also ignite a small portion of the ground, further igniting any Zeds who step in it. This ground fire will last for 10 seconds and also leave a small flare behind as a light source, very helpful in maps like Catacombs or in the subway system of Burning Paris. As a tool, the Molotovs make a great way to secure a choke point against trash, or set a pack of Zeds on fire if your normal weapon isn't available. Before we cover the weapons, it's important to understand a critical mechanic of the Firebug perk known as damage over time. In essence, when a Zed is set on fire, it receives damage over time or DOT effect that has a few factors that we'll need to understand. The first is duration, or how long the Zed will be ignited for. The second is interval, or how often the target will be damaged by the DOT effect. The third is scale, and this is a multiplier that is applied to the weapon's initial damage, and the product of the damage and multiplier is how much damage is delivered per interval. For example, if a Spitfire deals 40 damage normally and has a scale multiplier of 0.8x, then if a Zed is ignited, every interval that Zed would take 32 damage, assuming the absence of other factors. Damage over time is only applied to body health, even if your projectile or gout of flame strikes the head. This is very important when dealing with big Zeds, as you'll need to bank on being able to bring down their total body health, not head health, with one notable exception that we'll discuss later. Also, tap firing and aiming at the feet is the most ammo efficient way to deal damage with weapons like the Cock and Burn, Flamethrower, and Microwave Gun. As a general rule as well, do not upgrade either the Cock and Burn or the Flamethrower, as the damage improvements are rather negligible. The starting weapon for the Firebug will be the Cock and Burn, a surprisingly effective weapon even in the later portions of the game, however, exclusively as a trash killer. It can ignite small groups of clots and crawlers with only a few bursts, and is made even better with the Napalm skill. The Cock and Burn has a few potential advantages over other starting weapons in the early game. The first being that it is very efficient to rebuy early on if you've expended the vast majority of your ammo. The second is its ability to be efficient against groups of Zeds, as a single 4 ammo burst can set several enemies ablaze. Finally, it is pretty effective at keeping rioters at bay, either melting away their armor or keeping them fire panicked too long to be a real threat, and it's much more satisfying than shooting their knees out. The first tier 2 weapon for the Firebug is the Spitfires, featured in akimbo and as a single pistol. In almost any case, it's always better to take the dual wield option, increasing fire rate, damage per second, and your cool factor by a large margin. The big strength of the Spitfires is its high base damage and damage over time skill multiplier of 0.8, meaning not only will Zeds be taking a lot of initial damage, but a lot of damage over time. Paired up with Pyromaniac, and the Spitfires will really live up to their name in Zed time. capable of reaching over 1,000 damage per second at level 25 with Bring the Heat. The biggest drawback to the Spitfires is its slow reload time, making it technically more effective with the high capacity fuel tank skill. However, the difference is small, and you lose out on the additional damage over time and ground fire damage from Bring the Heat. The next tier 2 weapon is the Dragon's Breath or Incendiary Trench Gun, a pump action low capacity shotgun, last seen in our support guide. While I did get a lot of pushback for saying it was a bad support weapon, it is arguably an even worse Firebug weapon. As previously mentioned, the damage dealt each interval is a product of the weapon's initial damage, and since shotguns deal damage per pellet, dividing up the total potential damage by 8 in this case, its damage over time is logically quite low, having a multiplier of just 0.7 and a per pellet damage of only 26. Granted, the Dragon's Breath does have more damage per magazine and a longer damage over time duration compared to the Spitfires, but the fire rate is just too slow and in turn has the lowest damage per second out of all the ballistic Firebug weapons. The first tier 3 weapon and the last traditional ballistic Firebug weapon, the MAC-10, finds a much better home here than with the SWAT perk. Compared to the Spitfires, it slightly edges them out in damage per second outside of Z time. However, the MAC-10's ballistic damage is in the SMG category, while the Spitfires count as handguns. This means that most Zeds will be more resistant to the MAC-10, with the exception of Clots, Crawlers, Edars, and Skrakes. While this may make the MAC-10 seem like a more logical option since the Firebug is a trash cleaner, once we look at loadouts, you'll understand why the MAC-10 is at a small disadvantage. Overall though, the MAC-10 isn't awful, and works well in lieu of the Spitfires due to its quicker reload, similar DPS, and ability to perform a specialized takedown that we'll discuss later. The next tier 3 weapon, the Flamethrower, is the quintessential Firebug weapon, possessing nearly double the range of the Caulk and Burn with almost twice the damage as well. While its initial damage isn't anything special, its ability to ignite clusters of Zeds with relatively powerful damage over time effects make it great for clearing a room or a hallway of trash. Moving on to tier 4, the first offering is the Microwave Gun. While dealing slightly less damage than the Flamethrower, its attacks are much more powerful against metallic enemies like the Husk, Edar, Siren, Pounders, Skrake, and pretty much all the bosses when compared to fire. However, against Clots, Stalkers, and Crawlers, the Microwave Gun takes a serious damage penalty thanks to their high microwave resistance. To further reinforce its usefulness against big Zeds, it also comes with a secondary function that can push Zeds away, however, consuming 10 ammo in the process. Against Skrakes, it is possible to do a mostly clean takedown with decent timing of your alt fire, even with 6 players on Hell on Earth. However, it is much sloppier than any takedown any other perk can do, and is rather time and space consuming. Against Flesh Pounds, it shouldn't be attempted unless you are completely without options. The next tier 4 and final weapon for the Firebug, the Hus Cannon, is a weird weapon with a lot going on behind the scenes. In short, it's a pretty poor weapon choice, being inefficient at killing big Zeds and small Zeds alike, and not playing very well with the limited number of strengths that the Firebug does enjoy. I often see it touted as a good way to bring down Flesh Pounds for a Firebug, however, on Hell on Earth, this simply does not hold up, regardless of your approach. Moving on to skill selection, the most common setup will be Bring the Heat or high capacity fuel tanks, Ground Fire, Napalm, Heatwave, and Pyromaniac. If you're taking a purely ballistic build, I would swap Ground Fire for Barbecue since the Spitfires, the Dragon's Breath, and the MAC-10 do not create Ground Fire. If you're running into issues where Napalm is setting big Zeds on fire, then switching to Zed Shrapnel will be the preferred option. Unfortunately, the game's descriptions of certain skills are either vague or flat out wrong. For example, it says that Napalm and Barbecue both increase burn effects by 150% or 2.5x, However, napalm actually increases the duration by 250% or multiplies the time by 3.5x. In addition, all Zeds ignited by another flaming Zed due to napalm will see the DOT effects reduced by 60%. Firestorm also changes weapons range by varying amounts, with the microwave gun and flamethrower receiving the largest effect, and the Spitfires, Dragon's Breath, Mac-10, and Hus Cannon receiving no benefit whatsoever. For weapon loadouts, the best option for a balanced approach is going to be the Flamethrower, unupgraded, and the Tier 5 Spitfires. Use the Spitfires for long-range opponents and medium Zeds, and the Flamethrower for suppressing trash. Our next loadout is quite similar, swapping the Spitfires out for a Mac-10 at Tier 5. While you do lose a lot of your damage over time punch and damage per second with Pyromaniac, you do gain increased effectiveness against Skrakes and an easier to use weapon thanks to it being hit scan instead of projectile based, plus faster reloads. For this loadout, it is also recommended to use high capacity fuel tanks instead of Bring the Heat, as this will allow us to better utilize the Mac-10. Our final build is a mashup of the previous two, using the Tier 5 Mac-10 and the Tier 5 Spitfires for an all-round ballistic-based Firebug. While lacking some of the fun factor of using a flamethrower, it's still relatively practical if you're looking for something different, plus you'll always have a good weapon to use during Zed time. Now that we have a good perspective on what the Firebug has to offer, we can talk about how to apply it. Like with the demo, and perhaps more so, the Firebug is all about location and discipline. Setting big Zeds on fire outside of dire shit hit the fan emergencies is a very bad idea, and will likely get your team killed and yourself at the receiving end of a vote kick. You should also be very careful about sharing lanes with certain perks, such as the Gunslinger and Sharpshooter, who will be unable to score headshots against Zeds that flail around in agony. Commandos, as mentioned in almost all of my previous guides, need a steady flow of trash to secure Zed time extensions, and therefore, as a Firebug, you should stay away as much as possible. The final perk you should try to avoid would be the Berserker, as they also require some trash on hand to maintain their parry bonus. Classes like the Support and Demolitionist are ideal to be with, as both will see their performance minimally degraded in a chaotic environment. If a big Zed happens to be enraged by our fire, a demo can quickly remove it from our plane of existence with an RPG or two. For takedowns, there aren't really any for the Firebug, excluding a rather simple Skrake takedown, commonly known as the Puff and Sting. You will need a Mac-10 fully upgraded, a Flamethrower, high capacity fuel tanks, and Heat Wave. To accomplish this, approach the Skrake and puff it with your Flamethrower to knock it back, then quickly swap to the Mac-10 and Mag Dump into its face. While the Mac-10 can indefinitely stunlock the Skrake, you will need to use the Flamethrower to stumble him back, otherwise he will simply run away in a fiery rage, ruining the whole purpose of the takedown. This is a mildly challenging takedown, so a bit of practice will be required to perfect it. The microwave gun is capable of an acceptable fleshbound takedown in a vacuum with high capacity magazines, however, this is much more of an art than a science. This requires timing of alt fires to put distance between you and your foe, while using ground fire and burn damage to eat away at his health. When you compare the Firebug to other perks, it's clear it excels at killing trash even more than the SWAT or Commando in any capacity. But its biggest flaws are its inability to reliably assist with big Zeds, even in a half-assed way, without making the situation worse, and its tendency to cause chaos. In combat, generally, the more chaos you can force your enemy to endure, the better. However, with all other perks relying on clean and clinical precision to take down Zeds in some degree, chaos is not your friend in Killing Floor 2. Thank you very much for watching. Join us next time when we take a look at the Gunslinger. Feel free to let me know what your thoughts are on the Firebug in the comment section below. Also feel free to subscribe so you never miss a guide, or check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. Thank you again, but until next time, happy hunting.